Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth, the show that brings you conversations with influential voices who shed light on pressing issues facing our world. I'm Trudy Stern, and I couldn't be more excited about today's conversation. Joining us is Mike Doran, a renowned political commentator. He frequently appears on major TV networks as an expert on Middle Eastern affairs and has served as an advisor to world leaders on strategic policy matters. Mike Doran is a senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute. He specializes in Mideast security issues and has decades of experience studying the political, military, and diplomatic intricacies of that region. There is so much unfolding, from the shifting alliances in the Gulf to the multi-front war in Israel, with the war in Syria adding new layers of complications and intricacies. There's a lot to discuss, and Mike is here to help us unpack it all. So let's get straight to it. Mike Doran, welcome to Nothing But the Truth.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So while we were all eating turkey last week, Syria was embroiled in some very new battles. So can you give us an overview of what's going on there and who the players are?
Thanks. While we were eating turkey, Turkey was making a big play in Syria. I couldn't resist saying it. I think that's really the best place to start. Is what's happening is that the Syrian rebels, the opposition to the Assad regime, have moved southward, and they've taken Aleppo, the second biggest city in Syria, and they surprised the Assad regime, and they surprised the regime's backers, main backers, who are Russia and Iran. Behind the rebels stands Turkey. Now, the official position of the Turkish government is that this doesn't have anything to do with them. This is an initiative of the rebels themselves. But I think we should take all of that with a grain of salt. And we should also understand that Turkey is making this move, because Israel made it possible. Israel hollowed out Hezbollah and the Iranian resistance axis in Lebanon, and that has created an opportunity in Syria, because the Iranians and the Russians were using Hezbollah as an important force on the ground, as a reservoir of men on the ground to protect the Syrian regime. So the defeat or near defeat, whatever you want to call it, the successes of Israel against Hezbollah in Lebanon have weakened the Assad regime significantly. The Turks see an opportunity, and they have pushed southward to further weaken the regime and open up an opportunity for Turkey to get what it wants in Syria. I'll come back to what it wants in a minute. But the other thing we need to realize, and this is where it gets quite complex here, Trudy, the major element geostrategically operating in Syria is the Russian-Iranian alliance. That's also the major element operating in Ukraine. And what President Erdogan in Turkey sees, in Ankara, he sees an opportunity here to position himself as a major arbiter, both in Ukraine, where he is supporting the Ukrainian opposition to Russia, and in Syria, where he has a partial but significant disagreement with Russia and Iran. And he's positioning himself then so that when Donald Trump takes office on January 20th, he can become Washington's major interlocutor about these twin conflicts of Ukraine and Syria.
So Erdogan is seeing a very big opportunity here. Is that right?
Huge. He sees a huge opportunity. He's got, he has the second biggest army in NATO. He is absolutely crucial to the Ukrainian effort against Russia. And he is the single most influential actor on the ground in Syria. There's a bunch of foreign militaries in Syria. The United States, we're in the northeast of Syria, The Turks are in the are in Syria. The Iranians are in Syria. The Russians are in Syria. There's a bunch of foreign militaries there. He is the single most influential. He's not dominant, but the single most influential.
And he feels comfortable going against Iran and Russia.
Yes, yes. He's Turkey. Historically speaking, Turkey is a natural counterbalance to Iran and Russia. It's got complex relations with them, but they are often conflictual. It's not a zero-sum game between Turkey and Russia anywhere. It's not a zero-sum game between Turkey and Iran. But wherever Turkey is, Russia and Iran are not. That's the sort of way to think about it. They're kind of oil and water.
So how does this all affect Israel? Like, there's so many different points that we can discuss. So how does this affect Israel?
Bottom line is, it's really good for Israel. I don't think there's any way to interpret this as being bad. Well, there are people who are finding ways to interpret it as bad. We'll come back to them in a moment. But the bottom line is the advance of Turkey in the north, or the rebels backed by Turkey in the north, is weakening Iran. And anything that, by my reading of the geostrategic map, anything that weakens Iran is good for Israel.
And how do they have the power to go against Russia and Iran? Where do they have that? They don't have nuclear power, from what I understand. So where do they have the weapons, the power, to be able to launch that?
They're really only, when you look at the Middle East, people talk. I think people get caught up in the complexity of events on the ground because of there's always a large number of actors pursuing all kinds of different agendas, and they're all sort of swirling around like a kaleidoscope, and it's hard to follow all of the different actors on the ground. I think it's useful to step back and just think of how many powers are there in the region who are capable of projecting military power beyond their borders. And the numbers are very, very small. Israel, Turkey, Iran. Those are the only regional powers that are capable of projecting power. Of course, the United States is also there on the ground with military power. Russia is there. But in terms of the regional powers, it's Israel, Turkey, and Iran. Turkey has some 90 million people. It has an advanced industrial economy. It has the second biggest military in NATO. It is second biggest after us. So us and then the Turks. They are strategically located at the nexus of the continents, and so they're just an incredibly influential actor. I think we tend to, when we talk about the Middle East, we often kind of don't talk about them because they're primarily active in Syria and Iraq. And when we think about Israel, Lebanon, Gaza, we don't think much about the Turks. They're not major actors in the Gulf, but they are the greatest military power in the region, greater than Israel, actually.
So does the actions that Turkey is taking right now degrade Iran, and is that why it's beneficial to Israel? Does it distract Iran? Like, what are the benefits to Israel?
You just named it. They degrade and distract, and put them under enormous enormous pressure. They were, just a few years ago, they were sitting pretty. They had deployed Hezbollah out of Lebanon into Syria to be some of the major ground forces for the in favor of the regime. So there's kind of a division of labor in Syria between the Russians and the Iranians. The Syrian government, the Assad regime, its army disintegrated against the in response to the rebellion against it. So the Russians and the Iranians stepped in to shore up the regime, and there's a division of labor whereby the Russians provide the air power and the Iranians provide the troops on the ground. And they do that with militias from Iraq, Afghanistan, some leadership from Iran itself. But the most important contingent that they deployed was Hezbollah. And it's the most important contingent because they're the best trained and the most the loyal and subservient to Tehran. So when the Israelis degraded Hezbollah significantly over the last year, that created a vacuum a huge vacuum in Syria, into which the Turks and their proxies are moving.
So you just came back from Israel, and I know you can't discuss the details of what you were doing there, but could you just tell us, was Israel happy about these events? Or was Bibi happy about these events?
Well, all of this took place just after I left. I left just as the ceasefire in Lebanon was being negotiated, and just before the Turks made their move. My impression was that there was a lot of dissatisfaction in Israel with the ceasefire, or a lot of skepticism, maybe is a better way to put it. The vote in the cabinet was almost unanimous, and so I think that sent a signal to everyone that there was widespread agreement that the ceasefire was in Israel's interest at this moment. But there was concern that the ceasefire with Hezbollah was going to allow Hezbollah, that we're going to go back to the old way of doing things, whereby the Israeli Air Force degrades Hezbollah, or in other times Hamas, and then Israel withdraws, and then they regroup, and then we have the whole story all over again. And each time they regroup, they get more and more powerful and capable of inflicting greater damage on Israel. So there's a fear in the back of people's minds, maybe even in the front of their minds, that this is what's happening. But the prime minister is saying, no, 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 and he's saying it explicitly now. This is a ceasefire in Lebanon, but it's not an end to the war. It's in our tactical interest to do this at the moment. But what we are really trying to do here is shift from the Lebanon theater to the Iran theater. Because our ultimate goal in this war, he's saying, is to destroy the Iranian nuclear program. So I take him at his word. In talking to the people in the government at the higher levels of the government, I encountered a very, very optimistic mood. There was a very strong feeling that the Trump administration is going to be much more supportive of Israel than the Biden administration has been. There's not going to be this soft arms embargo on Israel. That will be lifted. And that Israel will have a partner in working with Washington against Iran, and in particular, the Iranian nuclear program. So I think that our final evaluation of this ceasefire has to be will only come clear after we see what happens after January 20th. If the Israelis and the Trump administration come to a joint strategy against Iran, then this ceasefire will have been absolutely the right thing to do.
So there has been talk in the United States that the reason that Israel entered into the ceasefire was to wait it out till after the Trump administration comes in, because they were concerned about what President Biden would do with regard to weapons embargoes. And is that factual? Is that the case?
I think 100%. I think there was fear of a UN Security Council resolution that would call on Israel for an immediate ceasefire and to withdraw from Lebanon and Gaza. The French have been circulating drafts or have been moving in that direction. And my impression is that the administration is kind of playing good cop, bad cop with the Israelis, saying, if you don't work with us to get to this ceasefire now, well, then we're going to have to move toward the French and what they're doing in what they want to do in the Security Council. And there are other things that the administration can do. I know for a fact that the British, the Canadians, and the Australians have prepared a sanctions package against the Israelis, again, in particular against ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. They prepared this before the election, the presidential election in the U.S., and they did this in coordination with the Biden administration. And the Biden administration was trying to decide, they were working out a kind of choreography where the British, the French, and the Canadians would issue these sanctions, and then the Americans would either associate themselves with it or make note of that in some way. So there are a number of avenues that the administration could go down between now and January 20th to make life difficult for the Israelis. None of this would be fatal for Israel. When President Trump comes into power, he can just with a stroke of his pen can overturn any of these policies that the administration that the Biden administration might engage in. But the Israelis don't want a binding Security Council resolution passed against them. That's something that could have lasting impact. Again, it wouldn't be horrendous for Israel, but it would be more than it would want to have to deal with. So yes, that's a long-winded yes to your question. The Israelis are trying to seeking a bridge from this moment to January 20th, trying to run down the clock on the Biden administration with the least amount of damage.
For those listeners who are joining late, you are joining a fascinating discussion with Mike Doran, expert on Mideast policy. So now let's bring into this grouping Azerbaijan. How do they weigh in? Most people don't even know that they exist. It's a very under the radar type of country, but I think they are much more important. And could you give us a flavor here?
Yes, I smiled because talking about Azerbaijan is one of my favorite things to do. I think Azerbaijan is a country that is of great strategic importance to the United States and to Israel, and it doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. It's the only country, it's in the South Caucasus. It's the only country that borders both Russia and Iran, and it is subservient to neither. And we don't pay attention to it in the United States as much as we should because we don't have a history of dealing with it. Historically, it was part of the Soviet Union. And then it's been locked in conflict with Armenia since the breakup of the Soviet Union. And because there's a significant Armenian diaspora in Moscow, France, and the United States, it's a vocal, politically active diaspora. It has a lot of influence and shapes and colors a lot of the perception of what Azerbaijan is all about. Azerbaijan is a majority Muslim country whose government is completely secular. They are Shiites. They are the brethren, the ethnic brethren of ethnic Azerbaijanis in Iran, who make up a whopping 1/3 of the population of Iran. So we tend to think of Iran as Persian. It's not Persian. It's not only Persian. There's a huge minority there in the northwest quadrant of Iran is Azerbaijani speaking. And so we've seen in the last few years the rise of Azerbaijan. It's a country of about 10 million people. It's gotten more and more powerful thanks to its endowments in fossil fuels. It has especially gas. Historically, it had oil. It doesn't have as much oil now as it used to have. It fueled the Soviet war, the World War in World War II. The oil for the Soviet Union came from Azerbaijan, but they still have a lot of gas. There's a southern gas corridor that goes from Azerbaijan over to Italy. Plays an important role in helping the Europeans have energy security. If we wanted, Azerbaijan is also the gateway to Central Asia. If you look at Azerbaijan from Moscow, it's the cork in the bottle of Central Asia. The Russians want to keep Central Asia. They want to keep make sure that all the resources of Central Asia, say gas in Turkmenistan, oil in Kazakhstan, that if they go to Europe, that they go through Russia. So it is effectively marketed to Russia, to Europe as Russian oil. Another way out, an alternative way out, is through Azerbaijan, and then it's controlled by neither Iran or Russia. So in this new world where we kind of see a constellation of Russia, China, and Iran against the United States, if we want to have Central Asia pulled away or not working for Russia and China, then Azerbaijan is of great importance. The Azerbaijani military has gotten a lot stronger in the last decade thanks to its alliance with Israel. Azerbaijan is one of the most important allies of Israel, and they have done remarkable things for Israel during this war, some of which they are keeping quiet. The Israelis and the Azerbaijanis prefer to keep quiet, but the basic assistance is in energy, but also there's a lot of military cooperation between the two. It's not a relationship that the Azerbaijani-Israeli relationship is not one that gets a lot of attention called to it. But I think every supporter of Israel needs to know that Azerbaijan is one of the top allies of Israel in the world.
Wow. Okay. I think that's definitely new information for our listeners and very valuable information. So
I spoke with very senior officials in Israel about this, and the senior officials in Israel are of course very much aware of this, and they do everything that they can to advance the reputation of Azerbaijan in the United States. There are a lot of forces, like I say, the Azerbaijanis have a lot of enemies who are doing everything they can to tarnish them, present them as jihadis, as crazy, genocidal Muslims, and so on. And it's a lot of nonsense. This is you can, as a Jew, I'm not a Jew, but as a Jew, you can walk down the street in Baku with a yarmulke on your head, and you're a lot safer than you are walking down the streets of Paris or almost any other European capital.
wow,
Even safer than you are in New York these days.
unbelievable. So we see this new grouping, or maybe it's not new to you, but to me it is very clearly. We have Russia, Iran, Syria, they're all allied. And then on the other side, we have Turkey, and Azerbaijan is allied with Turkey.
Right.
With,
sorry if I could interrupt you. I didn't mention
sure.
that, Azerbaijan and Turkey are brother and sister, or brothers. The phrase that they use in Turkish and in Turkey and in Azerbaijan is one nation, two states. And that's not just a political slogan. The sense of camaraderie and familial connection between them is very strong. The Azerbaijani language is a Turkic language, and Turkish and Azerbaijani Turkish are mutually intelligible. So it plays a very interesting role there, because as a great relationship alliance Azerbaijan does with Turkey, but also with Israel, despite all of the tensions that we've seen in recent years between Turkey and Israel.
So this is indeed very complex relationships. And where does the United States fit into this?
The United States, as usual, is confused. The Biden administration for the last 4 years has been pursuing an effort to come to a modus vivendi with Iran in the region. And in doing that, this is a continuation of Obama's the policy that Obama inaugurated, which is to try to kind of create a high table in the region at which the United States, Russia, and Iran all sit, and we sort out our problems at this high table. And sitting at that table are not Turkey, Israel, or Saudi Arabia. The United States represents them at the table, and then tells them how to behave. The prime example of that is the nuclear deal that the United States made with Iran. Of course, theoretically, this was the Europeans and the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians, but ultimately, in reality, this was really a bilateral U.S. The heart of the thing was a bilateral U.S.-Iranian agreement. And the Americans negotiated that with the Iranians, and then they shoved it down the throats of their allies. That is the vision that the Biden administration and the Obama administration have of how to properly organize the region, is that the United States should quietly negotiate with Iran about regional issues like Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and then it should try to work to get its allies to come to an agreement on the ground that's acceptable to both the United States and Iran. A great example of that was the Maritime Border Agreement that the Biden administration negotiated with the Lapid government in Israel just before Netanyahu came back. Lapid came to an agreement with Hezbollah, basically with the Lebanese government, but behind the Lebanese government stood Hezbollah, whereby Israel withdrew all claims to its exclusive economic zone in the Mediterranean in return for supposed quiet from Hezbollah on the border. We see how well that worked out. But what you didn't see, what a lot of the Israelis themselves didn't see, was that the United States was negotiating directly with the Iranians over that. And then the Iranians delivered Hezbollah, and the United States delivered the Israelis. That's the vision that the Biden administration has of a well-ordered Middle East. This is all coming undone because America's allies, Turkey, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, they were never happy with this, really. The Saudis came to accept it more than the Turks and the Israelis. But it's coming unraveled because you can't, the demands of the Iranians against the American alliance system ultimately are total. And so there's no deal to be had there. You can come to these temporary ceasefires that are really tenuous, and they're going to fall apart. But unfortunately, while the United States was trying to pursue that with Iran, it allowed Iran to become much more powerful, especially by selling oil to China. You know, the oil sales to China are at an all-time high. So the coffers are full in Iran. They moved closer to a nuclear weapon in the last 4 years, and they have advanced a lot on the ground until Israel started to roll them back.
Wow, it seems like that region is really on fire. And so two questions I have before we have to close. One, will Israel get involved with this Syria civil war? Assad, I had seen reports that Assad asked Israel to help, and in return they would throw out the IRGC. Is that credible? Is that true? And Do you think Israel will get involved?
I doubt Israel will get involved. It all depends how this goes. I doubt the Assad regime will fall. I doubt the Russians will be kicked out. So I think that the Turks will restrain the rebels at some point. Exactly where the Assad regime has been proved to be a lot weaker than we knew, so that the rebels took all of Aleppo, and now they're banging on the gates of Hama, and there's a lot of regime defections. So we got to watch it and see how it goes. If the regime collapses in Hama, and the rebels move further south, that's quite a precarious situation for the regime. I doubt the manpower of the rebels would allow them to go beyond Hama, but we have to watch and see how it unfolds. Let's assume that it's going to unfold the way I think, which is that the rebels will not advance much further than where they are now at the gates of Hama. If that's the case, then, like I said, what President Erdogan will do is he'll set himself up for to have an effective triangular negotiation with the Russians and the Americans, and there will be a very complex negotiation because it will involve both Ukraine and Syria. In that case, if that's what happens, the Israelis, I think, will just sit on the sidelines and enjoy the pressure under which the Iranians and the Russians are coming. There is an idea out there, it's being pushed heavily by the Emiratis, that Israel should work together with the Emiratis and the Saudis to try to detach Assad from Iran. The idea is that what the Israelis want is they want the border between Syria and Lebanon to be closed, so that Syria will no longer be a conduit for resupply of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And what they want to offer the Syrians is, you can have the survival of your regime, and you can do it together with the Russians, but you have to get rid of the Iranians. This has some traction in some quarters, and some Israelis entertain this possibility. I don't think it will work because I think the Russians and the Iranians are like Siamese twins. Like I said before, there's this division of labor whereby the Russians give the air power and the Iranians provide the power on the ground. I don't think that the money that would come in from the Saudis and the Emiratis would allow Assad to build up an alternative to the Iranian forces that the Russians need. I don't think the Russians are going to, after all this support that Iran has given them in Ukraine and elsewhere, I don't think the Russians will turn their backs on them. They might play a game, suck the Israelis and the Emiratis into negotiations, maybe suck some money out of them. They're trying to get the Emiratis. The Emiratis are lobbying here in Washington to have American sanctions removed from Assad so they can pour money in to build up Assad. I hope the Israelis don't fall for this. I don't think they will, because right now their attitude should be anything that puts Iran under severe pressure is a good thing, and they should just let it play out and see how it goes. Ultimately, what I would love to see, I've been advocating this for years, and I have to admit now at this point it's a bit of a long shot. But with Trump coming in, the chances have improved. What am I talking about? The United States working with the Turks and the Israelis to squeeze the Russians and the Iranians in Syria really good. Squeeze them very hard. Force them to close the border under threat of toppling the regime. Turkey and Israel are they're oil and water, unfortunately, or even worse. There's a lot of friction there. So I don't think the Turks and the Israelis could do this on their own. But under an American plan, where the United States worked with the Turks on the one hand in the north of Syria and worked with the Israelis in the south. There is a kind of comprehensive plan that I think could be enacted. That's how the United States did things during the Cold War. That was the Syria was an ally of the Soviet Union, and the United States coordinated with the Israelis and the Turks to put pressure on the Soviets in Syria. I think that's how we should. That would be my dream. In a lot of pro-Israel circles, the feelings toward Turkey are so hostile that this kind of idea doesn't get a lot of support. But to me, it makes sense on the basis of what the raw interests of these countries are.
Well, hopefully that there will be a strategic, you know, a strategic look at this. Sadly, we are out of time. I could listen to you talk for another hour, and I certainly hope that you will come back to Nothing But the Truth. And as things continue to unfold, and give us your insights. And I hope you will come back. We're out of time. That wraps up this week's episode of Nothing But the Truth. A huge thank you to our guest, Mike Doran, whose deep expertise on the Middle East shed invaluable light on the complexities of the Mideast neighborhood. His insights provided a clearer understanding of its intricate dynamics and far-reaching impact on the rest of the world. To our audience, thank you for tuning in to Nothing But the Truth. Don't forget to join us every Thursday night at 9:30 p.m. for another compelling conversation. And if you missed any part of the show or want to revisit past episodes, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Trudy Stern, and remember, you'll always get the truth here.